My paranormal experiences happened at my grandparents' home. I wanted to start by just kind of talking about my family history with having paranormal experiences. I will say, like, I grew up hearing about my grandma, my great grandma, my great great grandma, always just being a little bit more sensitive to these things. Specifically, the women in my family. It wasn't just the women in my family, but I would say specifically the women had the most experiences, the strongest experiences. So starting off, I wanted to talk about the house that my grandma grew up in when she was a little girl. I think she was about middle school age, about 12 years old. She grew up in this house. There was only one other family that ever lived there. So it was the family before my grandma lived there, and then my grandma and her parents, obviously. So when she was about 12 years old, they moved into this very old farmhouse. I think it was built in the late 1800s, very, very early 1900s, very, very early, if it was at all. And the upstairs attic, my great grandma wanted to change it into another bedroom because they needed more space. And when they got up there, they noticed that it had been previously lived in, but there was also like chicken feed up there and other random things. So my grandma's like, okay, well, I need to clean this out and get it ready for my grandma and her sister, so my great aunt. So she cleaned it all up and the girls moved in there. And not too long after that, my grandma and my aunt were sleeping one night. And my grandma said she woke up and she saw the moon coming in through the window and the room was lit up by the moon. And she looks over at the wall and she sees the shadow of a chicken. This might sound very silly, but she saw this shadow of a chicken on the wall and she was like, oh my gosh, like, why is there a chicken in my house? Let alone we live in the attic of this house. Why is there a chicken there? And she said she sat up and she turned to wake up her sister and she turned and she realized that her heated blanket had been turned like all the way up on high. And she's like, wow, that's really strange. But she turned and she went to go wake up her sister. And she noticed that there was a figure standing over her sister. And she gasped, obviously, because that frightened her. And she went to go turn around because as she gasped, the figure turned towards her and started walking towards her. So she turned around to hide herself. And as she turned around and she was sitting there, she said, all of a sudden I felt this cold chill just go right up my spine. And then I felt breathing on my hair, but so hard that it was blowing my hair as I was sitting there. And she said, as soon as I felt the breathing on my hair, my mom opened the door and she was like, how did you know that I needed you? And my great grandma, her mom, said, because I could hear you breathing. And so that was the start of everything. And my grandma said it all started when my great grandma fixed up that bedroom. So come to find out, the story behind that was after, I'll get into it a little bit more, what more things they experienced. But when they started experiencing things, my grandma's like, okay, we need to figure out what's kind of going on here. So she talked to the neighbors and the neighbors told them, oh yeah, so the family that lived here before you, they had 2 hired hands that helped them on the farm. One of the guys had a little bit of, I think he had some mental disabilities. And this was during World War II time. And he was petrified that he was going to get drafted for the war. And unfortunately, the other hired hand that they had kind of teased him about it and played into it a little bit and told him like, oh yeah, you're probably going to get drafted. And he had a physical one morning to go make sure it was just a physical to go check everything over for the possibility of getting drafted. And he couldn't handle that stress. And this is where it gets a little bit sad. He couldn't handle that stress. He had a pet chicken And he took that pet chicken and he lit himself and the pet chicken, unfortunately, on fire, committing suicide. So this is all very terrible. But this all starts to make sense as my grandma's talking about, like, seeing the pet chicken in this room, which come to find out this is where he stayed at this house, which makes sense why there was chicken feed in the room, because apparently he kept the chicken in the room with him. So it's starting to all make sense. So they're like, okay, so this person died in a very tragic way here. And obviously his presence in some way is still here. So at some point, my great grandma decided to, and this part is weird for me, and this part is weird for my grandma, because even though we've always experienced paranormal things, or we've always been very sensitive to it, this part seems a little bit weird to me. I don't know why my great grandma would do this, but she decided that it was a good idea to get a Ouija board. And my great grandma and my grandma used it in the house one time. It only took one time. They used it in the house, and my grandma said immediately both of their hands started whipping all over the board, and they were both petrified, and they stopped. They didn't close out the session or whatever. They just stopped, and my grandma destroyed it and got rid of it. So after that, they kept experiencing more and more. So they experienced, my grandma and her sister, they would have their blankets taken from their bed, thrown in the middle of the floor. It would throw their beds all over the place. It would open up cupboards, take stuff out of the cupboards. It would open up. I don't know if anybody knows about like big, old, very old farmhouses. The doors are very heavy. And my grandma said that they would also have a hard time opening the doors. They would stick, but they would just watch the doors open and slam shut right in front of them. I mean, this wasn't happening when they were sleeping and they were like, oh, that's weird, we're hearing stuff. It was like, no, these things were happening in front of them. Doors were opening, slamming shut. Cupboards were opening. This entity or whatever spirit would take stuff, take your belongings, your items, hide it, and then it would reappear in plain sight in a completely different place. They had a piano that would play in the middle of the night. And eventually, they ended up giving that piano to the neighbor, and they were like, we can't handle this anymore. Like, this piano is playing at all times, like I said, mostly in the middle of the night. And my great grandpa was like, I can't deal with this anymore. So they gave it to the neighbor. And actually that piano kept playing at the neighbor's house, so much so that their neighbor took an axe to it and broke it apart and burned it. So whatever was attached specifically to that piano, I don't know, but I think moving forward, because of that potential Ouija board, how they started a session and then they just never closed it, I think they left something open. And I'll explain more to that in a little bit, but I think maybe that was something different that attached itself for whatever reason to that piano, because it kept playing, like I said, at the neighbor's house, but the other things never stopped at my grandma's house. She would tell me about how she only a handful of times, maybe 3 times ever, would she wait in the house for the bus, because she would be standing there waiting, and she said she would feel all of a sudden she would get very cold again. Every time this presence came into the room, she's like, I instantly knew something was going to happen, because it would just get ice cold. It would come into the room where she was waiting, and she was like, he would breathe on me. And again, so much so that her hair would move, and she just couldn't handle that. She's like, I just cannot deal with this. So it didn't take very many times for her to just be like, you know what? I'm waiting outside for the bus now. I do not want to stay in here anymore. And she would talk to my great grandma about it. And she was like, are you experiencing these things like while you're here, as far as like the breathing, like you could hear it, you could feel it? And my great grandma's like, yes, I am here all day long. Like, I experience a lot of things all day long because I'm here by myself. And eventually, unfortunately, going back to what I said about potentially leaving something open with this Ouija board. My grandma said eventually things started to get scarier, more like evil scarier. So in the beginning, it was more so like, okay, I don't want to be experiencing this, but it was nothing harmful. It was, scary to see this person in your bedroom at night. It was scary to, hear doors slamming or see cupboards opening and shutting and, know that your things are like going missing and then they would show up. But it wasn't necessarily like evil. Where it kind of took a turn was one night my great grandma was sleeping and she woke up, and on the back of the door of their bedroom, they had hooks on the back of their door, and that's where they kept their clothes. They didn't have closets, so they would hang their clothes up on the back of the door. And my grandma kept hearing this hanger swinging back and forth and hitting the door. And she would sit up and she would look, and the hanger would stop swinging as soon as she would sit up and look and be like, what is happening? Like, why does this keep happening? So this happened a couple of times where she would lay back down, the hanger would start swinging, hitting against the door, and she would sit up and look, and it would stop. So that probably happened like 3 or 4 times until the last time when she heard the hanger. She went to go sit up. As she went to go sit up, she felt this immense weight on her chest, and she opened her eyes, and all she saw was these. She says, so my grandma says they were glowing. She didn't say in what particular way, but she said she saw these glowing eyes, like these evil glowing eyes just right above her face. And it was just pressing down so immensely on her chest that she said, in that moment, I thought that I was going to die. Like, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And it was just staring me in the face. And initially, when I heard this, I was like, okay, obviously when people talk about sleep paralysis, they talk about not being able to move and they talk about seeing things and all of that. And I completely understand all of that. But to me, my grandma had already been awake for several minutes and been getting up and moving around and never actually going back to sleep. She would lay back down and then the noise would continue. So could it have been that? Yeah, sure it could have been, but it just doesn't necessarily make sense to me with everything else that was going on. And the fact that, again, that she was already awake and had been moving around. So again, that's when things kind of got a little bit scarier. Not too long after that, they decided that they were going to move. They were going to move into town. They lived out in the country. Actually, it was called the Old English Settlement. There were lots of other settlements in the area that were typically named after the country of the founder. So the Norwegian settlement, the English settlement, you get the idea. So not too long after that, they decided that they wanted to move into town. They did have, my grandma still has the newspaper articles that they wrote about this house and what they were experiencing. And my grandma did tell me this piece of information I didn't know until I talked to her, actually. My grandma did tell me that they did speak with some people from one of the colleges, one of the universities in my state. I live in Wisconsin, by the way. I guess I didn't mention that before. From the UW here in Wisconsin. And they actually told my family that they were experiencing a poltergeist. So I thought that was very interesting. I didn't know that part. But when I was talking to my grandma, she was like, yeah, they wrote about it in the paper, and there was supposed to be another, I don't know if it was supposed to be on the news. I'm trying to remember now. I guess it doesn't matter too much, but some other form of media. I want to say it was the news or something along those lines, but it ended up actually not airing. And my grandma, when I was talking to her yesterday, was like, actually, I'm happy about that, because she was like, that was my life. That was what I was experiencing. And it was awful and terrible. And I didn't necessarily want lots of other people to know this, just because she's like, I know what I experienced. I know what happened. But some people, she's like, you either believe in it or you don't believe in it. And that's totally fine. But she's like, I experienced what I experienced. And initially, people would laugh and say, oh, haha, like that's not real or whatever, or dismiss it. And my grandma's like, you get kind of sick and tired of hearing people say that. So she was happy that, I guess she was happy that they didn't end up airing it. But they were told that was what was going on, which I thought, again, was very interesting because I didn't know that piece of information. But then my grandma also did say the last week that they were there that she didn't sleep in that room because that room there was obviously activity in the whole house, but that room was the main activity because that was his room. That was where he slept. So my grandma said she slept out in the hall the last week that they were there, which to me, I don't know why necessarily. I don't know if I would pick the hallway. That seems a little scary to me too, but that's where she felt the safest. And she did tell me too, she's like, quite honestly, like, it was so scary to me. She's like, I genuinely wasn't sure if like I was going to make it out of that house just because it was so constant and like things just kind of kept progressing. And it's being an adult, like, again, I grew up with these stories, but being an adult and hearing like your grandma say that to you is, I don't know, there's something about it that's a little, it makes it more real. Not that I ever doubted. I've witnessed too many things or I've heard too many things to ever doubt, but it just makes it a little bit more real. Like hearing somebody tell you this, like it's very scary, even though that was many, many years ago. My grandma's in her 70s. That was many years ago. But yeah, it's scary to hear somebody talk about it like that. But eventually they did move into town and the house burnt down. I don't know the specific details about that. Again, when I was talking to my grandma yesterday, she was just telling me that there were only ever two families, our family and the family before, and nobody else lived there. I don't know if it was burnt down or if something kind of just spontaneously happened. I'm not sure. But that is the kind of a little backstory experience, I guess, that happened with my grandma and my great grandma. And that was just kind of the tip of the first story I guess I ever grew up hearing, or the first experience that really just sticks in my mind. And then I went on to have my own experiences. So my experiences specifically were actually at my grandma, who I was just talking about, at her and my grandpa's house, again, in Wisconsin, small little town out in the country, farm town in Wisconsin. I've had two actual physical experiences there. The rest of them were more so just things that other people experienced, just the overall knowledge of my grandparents' home and just, again, the feeling when you're there. So when I was little, I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house. They lived, again, out in the country. They lived on a farm. We have a couple of all of my family are farmers. We have a couple of farms in my family, all very old, all have been in our family for a long time, a very long time, both sides, my grandma's side and my grandpa's side. So the house that my grandma and grandpa lived in was a house, I believe, again, another home, very late 1800s, very, very early 1900s. Small 2-story farmhouse. I spent a lot of time there. I spent a lot of time at their house. I spent a lot of time on the farm. I spent a lot of time out in the country. I loved it out there. My family's still out there. My dad actually moved out there when I was out of the house at this point, but my dad built his house on our other farm that we had. They tore down that old farmhouse that had been there for 150 years. They tore that one down and my dad built his house there. So now my dad is also out there. So I didn't actually live there, but I spent, oh gosh, all of my summers and weekends there. So to give you a little bit of an idea, before I had my experiences, I always felt uneasy in my grandparents' home. Not because of the people in the home, but the home itself. There was never a place in that home that I felt like something feels off. Like something feels like there's always somebody here with me, or I'm being watched, or somebody's going to walk around the corner. That was always how I felt. When you walked into my grandparents' home from the outside, you initially walked into the mudroom, and then you would walk up like 3 stairs, and then there's a small landing, and then from that landing, you would walk right into my grandparents' kitchen. When you walked into the kitchen, directly off to the left-hand side was a very small bathroom, enough for a sink, a toilet, and a tub. Very small bathroom. And then you were in the kitchen. And then from the kitchen there, straight ahead, there was our little dining room area. And then right after the dining room was the living room area. And then the living room area, the furthest to the right was the door. And through the door was the steps going up to the second level. So whenever specifically I was downstairs in the kitchen, it just always felt like I would look at the corner that goes around into the living room, and it just felt like somebody was constantly just going to walk around that corner. If you've experienced being in a house that there were spirits or entities or whatever, you know that feeling of like somebody's here with me. If I closed my eyes, I would think that somebody was there and I would open my eyes and see somebody, but that's always how it felt. I will also say that I had a lot of anxiety as a kid, just naturally. I had a lot of anxiety as a kid, but when I would go over to my grandparents' house, even though I loved being there because I did, it would kind of become physical. So I would throw up a lot, like at my grandparents' house. And maybe this is nothing, but it was specifically at my grandparents' house that I would always, like my anxiety would always manifest physically. And looking back on it, I don't know if it was because my energy was like slightly being manipulated, if it was just too much for me. I'm not sure what it was, but like it just always felt, I just always felt off. So the first experience that I had, I was outside with my grandpa. We were actually in the tractor. We were just coming home. And I told him he was about to go feed the cattle. And I told him I had to use the restroom. So he dropped me off. Nobody else was home. My grandma was still at work. He dropped me off. I ran inside. And again, when you go up the mudroom stairs, you're immediately in the kitchen, and then directly off to the left-hand side is the bathroom. So I go into the bathroom and I sit down, and not too long after that, all of a sudden, a cat walks in to the bathroom. Now, it's a very specific cat. It's a calico cat. And I see this cat, and immediately I know who this cat is. My grandparents had this cat. Her name was Ma Cat. If you know about farms, there's lots of cats on the farm. Well, at my grandparents' farm, they were spaced out enough in between farms where at this particular farm, they didn't have a lot of farm cats. They actually only had Ma Cat, and she would wander around, do her thing. She always had babies, but the babies, again, because they're out in the country and there are other farms around, the babies, when they would grow up, they would go. They would be gone. So it was always just Ma Cat that ended up just being alone by herself. And at this point, Ma Cat had already passed away. So I'm sitting there in the bathroom and I see this cat walk in, and that terrifies me because Ma Cat is no longer alive. So I jump up and I shut the door. And after I shut the door, I hear a couple just little paws on the door, and then it stops. I stayed in that bathroom until my grandma got home. My grandma wasn't actually too far behind us. I probably was in there for like 15 minutes. And she got home and I said, Grandma, I just saw Ma Cat. And she goes, what are you talking about? Like, Ma Cat has been passed away for a couple of years. And I go, oh, I'm well aware, but she just walked into the bathroom. And my grandma, when we were talking about this again the other day, she was like, yeah, you know, what's so funny is when it would get really cold outside, I didn't want her to be outside in the cold. So I would let her in, but I only let her in the bathroom, and she would sleep in the bathroom at nighttime. And then I would let her out and she would run back outside and be outside during the day. So she was like, it's really funny that she walked right back into that bathroom. And I go, yeah, yes. I was like, for my first like actual physical experience, I was like, yeah, I guess it's not the scariest. I mean, if you're going to see something, a little spirit kitty, like, I think that's the best one to have, but it still freaked me out as a kid. And then not too long after that, myself and my cousins spent the night at my grandparents' house, and we all slept downstairs, and my grandma slept on the couch. And my grandma is laying there. It's the middle of the night. We're all sleeping, presumably sleeping, and it's dark. And she's like, all of a sudden I hear something running across the floor. And then I feel something jump up onto my chest and then start kneading my chest. And she was like, I didn't open my eyes because it kind of freaked me out a little bit, but she's like, I just knew. She's like, when she first heard it, she said, oh gosh, that sounds like a cat. But we don't have, first of all, my grandparents, when they had cats, again, it was just Ma Cat. And then occasionally you would see another farm cat, but these cats did not come in the house. They were not allowed in the house, nor did they want to. If you know anything about farm cats, they are not necessarily trying to have a ton of human affection. So she was like, wow, that feels like a cat. And then, started kneading. And she was like, I did not want to open my eyes. Because she's like, I was a little freaked out, even though, nothing dangerous, but she's like, it freaked me out. And again, that happened right after like I had my experience. And my grandma was like, oh, interesting. And I was like, see, I told you she was around for a little bit. And to my knowledge, that was the last experience as far as with Ma Cat that anybody had. It was just myself and my grandma. So that was my first ever like physical experience. My second ever physical experience in that house was the last time I ever spent the night at my grandparents' house. I was 18 years old and I was spending the night with my cousin. We were down in the living room and we were just staying up watching TV very late at night till about like 2 a.m. And then we were like, okay, we should probably go to sleep now. So again, in the living room, right off to the furthest part of the living room, right off to the right-hand side was the door. You open the door and you go right upstairs. Now, when you get upstairs, you can either go to the right, like directly to the right is a bedroom, directly to the left is a bedroom. Then there's the hallway. And then down that hallway, right off to the right-hand side is my grandparents' room. There's another little bedroom next to my grandparents' room on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, there's a door to go up to the attic, and then straight ahead, there's a small little bathroom. So we went up to the stairs, and we went directly to the right into the bedroom that we called the girls' room. I had lots of cousins growing up, so the girls' room was typically where the girls slept, and then off to the left-hand side was the boys' room where the boys typically slept. So we went to the girls' room, which also had a full-size bed, so a bigger bed for both my cousin and I to sleep in. So we get into bed, we're laying down. Again, it's late, so she's kind of pretty much drifting off to sleep already. Now, I will tell you, my, again, family in general has a lot of paranormal experiences. Like, I could go on and on about it. To be honest with you, we have pictures, we have videos, we have lots of things. But my cousin in particular, she grew up in 2 extremely haunted houses. Again, with pictures, they experienced some really creepy things. So this particular cousin does not get spooked easily. So I'm laying there in bed. I cannot go to sleep because, again, I feel like I'm just being watched. Now, this particular room, again, the girls' room, there's a lot of activity for whatever reason in this room. I'm not the only one that's experienced it. My aunts growing up would hear people calling their names. They would hear people talking in this particular room. So I'm not the only one that necessarily felt that way in this room. So I'm sitting there while I'm laying there and I cannot get to sleep. And I tell my cousin, I'm like, Kaylee, my cousin's name is Kaylee. I said, Kaylee, I am so uncomfortable right now. I'm like, I cannot sleep. It feels like somebody is staring at me from the foot of the bed. And it just feels like I'm being watched. And she was like, Devin, I don't care. She's like, I don't care. Go to sleep. I'm tired. Just go to sleep. And again, she's so used to this stuff. She really, truly doesn't care. And so I was like, okay, all right. I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to try to go to sleep. So I turn onto my side. And as I'm laying on, like, as I turn onto my side, I have like my legs kind of like curled up a little bit, not quite in like the balled up position, but I just bring my legs up to my chest just a little bit more. And I'm laying there and I am not asleep, but I have my eyes closed and I'm just like, okay, like I'm doing the thing of trying to lull myself into sleep. After about, to be honest with you, I don't even know. It wasn't a huge amount of time, maybe a couple minutes. I'm jolted awake, or not awake, but I'm jolted, like eyes open. What just happened? I guess I should also say where I am laying and I'm facing the wall. Next to my head is a small little nightstand. And then on the nightstand, there's a small little stack of books, like three books that are on this nightstand. And I'm facing that way. I get jolted up. I look up, I open my eyes because I am thinking, what the heck just made me like jump up? And I look and this stack of books has been taken from the nightstand and put next to my legs, my knees, where they're sitting very close to my chest. And I said, nope, nope, no, I am not okay with this. I put the books back. I wake up my cousin and I told her what just happened. And I said, I'm not okay with this. I have to leave. At this point, it's probably about 3 a.m. I said, tell grandma and grandpa that I'm okay and I am safe, but I need to leave right now. So I run down the stairs. Again, we are out in the middle of the country. It is pitch black. It's pitch black everywhere. My grandpa also is a big stickler for lights being on when they shouldn't be on. So I am realizing that I need to not only get down the stairs, through the living room, through the dining room, through the kitchen, I also have to go through the mudroom and outside to my car in the pitch black in the middle of the country at 3 a.m. after this had happened to me. So I jump up, I run down the stairs. Well, first of all, I jump up, I turn the lights on in the hallway, run to the bottom of the stairs, turn the lights off because I know that I'm going to turn every single light on as I am leaving until I get out of the house. But I also have to shut them off at the same time. So I run to the bottom of the stairs, shut the lights off really quick, run from the stairs to the living room light switch, turn that on very quickly. Then I know that I have to make it from the living room to the kitchen. So I run from the living room, shut that light off. As I run from the living room to the kitchen, flip the kitchen light on. I'm standing there. I'm trying to get out as fast as I can, but I'm also like petrified because again, I have to go out in the pitch black. I shut off the kitchen light, turn on the mudroom light as fast as I can. I'm sitting out in the mudroom. For whatever reason, I always felt okay in the mudroom. Like it never quite freaked me out as much as everything else did. So I sit in the mudroom just for a minute and I'm looking out the door and I see my car and I know that I have to run to my car. And the only light that we do have is our farm, is the really tall farm light. So I shut the mud light off really quick and I sprint to my car. Luckily, small town Wisconsin out in the country, nobody ever locks anything, especially however many years ago it was at this point. Nobody ever locked anything. So I didn't lock my car door, so I didn't have to worry about that. So I just jump in and I call my mom right away because at this point I was, again, 18 and I was in school at the time. So I was still, for that next year, I was still living with my mom. And I call my mom and I say, I'm okay, I'm safe, but I am coming home right now and I'll tell you what happened when I get home. I was so terrified as I was driving home because, for reference, I was out in the country and where I was driving to was the city. But before you get to the city, there's about 35 minutes of country back roads, total darkness, blackness. And in general, like when you're driving in it, it's a little scary, but for the most part, it's fine. But when you've experienced something that's got your adrenaline pumping and you're freaked out and you've always kind of been freaked out and then your fears have kind of been confirmed, I was really on edge. So I drive home, and that was the last time that I ever stayed at my grandparents' house. And I would go back, of course, I would go there, but I never stayed there. And my grandma has since moved, but my aunt bought the farmhouse from my grandma. So my grandma now lives at our other farm where my dad built his house. My grandma also built a house there because we have a decent amount of land. So my grandma also built a house there. And my aunt moved in to the farmhouse. And my aunt has 4 children. 3 of them are all out of the house. But when one of them comes back, her boyfriend lives in the area and he'll stay over at the house with them. He refuses to sleep downstairs. He's like, I can't do it. I can hear people walking around upstairs. You can hear people talking upstairs. My grandma talks about how she could always hear people talking in the register, in the vents. And sometimes so much so that she legitimately thought at one point when my aunt lived at home with her and her husband, my aunt's husband, when they first got married, she thought that they were having a party downstairs. My grandma said she woke up in the middle of the night, went to the bathroom, and she could hear talking like in the register. And she was like, what are they doing? Like, are they seriously like having people over like super late at night? And she went downstairs and no, it was pitch black. Nobody was down there. I don't know if my aunt and uncle were there or not, if they were sleeping or if they weren't there, but she was like, nope, nobody was there. So it was just lots of stuff like that. And it wasn't evil. It wasn't bad. It was just very unsettling. I mean, for me, for my grandma, she kind of got used to it. She got used to hearing people walking around or talking. And for me, it was just very unsettling. Originally, when I had talked to you, Vic, I said I had 2 experiences, and that's true. But as I'm sitting here talking about this, I'm remembering something that happened that was an experience, but because it was more so personal to me, I didn't see it in the same light. So I'm going to share that as well. So unfortunately, my grandpa, who also lived in this house, he passed away 10 years ago, and he was so incredibly important to me. Like I said, I spent my summers with them. I spent weekends with them. He's such a special person in my life. And he passed away very suddenly. One day he was there and then one day he wasn't. So it was a huge shock for our whole family. And now, mind you, when my grandpa passed, he was very young. He was 64 years old. So again, huge shock for everybody. And my family is very close. So we all kind of, after that happened, we all rallied together, right? So like my grandma, everybody moved back. So my dad moved back to, not that they were that far away, but my dad moved back, built his house on the other farm. My aunt built her house across the street from my dad's house. And then my other aunt bought the other farm right after that happened. So everybody kind of just rallied together for my grandma and just for each other. But when that happened, a couple things happened. One of them specifically that I was there to witness. And then another one that I still think is very special, but it happened to my grandma and my cousins. So after this happened, my grandma was obviously very upset. And I should also mention 6 weeks before this to the day, my uncle, so my grandpa's brother, passed away. his wasn't so unexpected. It was, but it wasn't. He had cancer, but then all of a sudden it kind of went really quickly. So that was my grandpa's brother, and they also lived right up the road from us. So again, very close family. So he passed away 6 weeks before my grandpa unexpectedly passed away. So both my aunt, my great aunt, and my grandma are going through this very hard grieving process. So they decide that they want to talk to a medium, somebody that they had been referred to previously. And specifically, my aunt wanted to. My grandma said that she would go for support, but it wasn't my grandma that was going to, find any information. It was my aunt. So my grandma and my aunt go, and as they're there, the medium is talking to my aunt and my uncle Harry. His name was Harry. My uncle Harry, very quiet person. You didn't hear him talk very much. He was very quiet, reserved. He was a woodworker, and he spent a lot of his times like alone out in his shop. That's what he did. So very, very quiet person. My grandpa was 100% the opposite of that. Very outgoing, very fun, happy guy, like was always the life of the party, just a talker. My grandpa was a talker. And so they go to the medium, and the medium is talking to my aunt, and she is getting information through. She's getting little bits of information through to my aunt. I won't necessarily like go into super detail about it. And my grandma's just sitting there. My grandma's just there. And all of a sudden the medium's like, I am so sorry. I am having a hard time because there's somebody else that's here, and they're much louder, much more vocal, and talking over your husband. And my grandma is like, what? And then she starts to talk about my grandpa, actually. And she had all of this crazy information. It was actually very wild. She had all this crazy information that she was telling my grandma. Again, I won't necessarily get into all that detail, but they had that experience, and it was a wonderful experience for them. And it was a wonderful experience for us to hear about. But when my grandma came home to tell us about this, because again, they got all of this great information, and it was so funny to us to listen to somebody talk about my uncle and my grandpa in the way that we knew them, and to just know that whatever you believe, to just know that their essence or their soul or their whatever is like true to who they are, even not in the physical. So we're all sitting around listening to my grandma talk about what she had just experienced like a couple days before. And we're all in the living room, this same living room that I had previously talked about. We're all sitting in the living room, and the TV is on, but the TV is muted. And on the TV, this is important. It's silly, but it's important. On the TV is Family Guy. And we're sitting there talking, and then all of a sudden the TV goes to max volume. So we're sitting there talking about my grandpa. All of a sudden the TV goes to max volume. And again, it's on Family Guy. And my dad turns to one of my brothers, and I have siblings that are much younger than me, like 13 years younger than me. My dad turns to one of my brothers, and he goes, why did you just turn the TV up so loud? He's like, turn it down. We're having a conversation. And my brother's like, I didn't do anything. I didn't do it. The remote was not completely underneath, but behind the chair and like pushed back so that nobody was actually like able to touch it. Like nobody had touched it. Right. But it was out of the way that you had to go and get it, like on the ground, like kicked across the floor behind this chair. And we were like, what the heck? And then all of a sudden everybody says, oh my gosh. So my grandpa hated the show Family Guy. And we're sitting here talking about him. And then all of a sudden the TV goes up to max volume, and we go, oh my gosh, somebody grab a camera. We grabbed a camera and we took a picture of the living room as we're all sitting there. And right by us are two big floating orbs. I still get goosebumps. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. And for us, like it was instant. The minute we saw, sorry, I just snapped my fingers. The minute we saw these orbs, we all knew, like, we were like, oh my gosh, they are both here with us right now. They want us to know that they're here with us right now. And it was just like the coolest experience. Like I've never had something happen so immediate like that. And it was just such a calming, reassuring experience. And my grandpa definitely stuck around a little bit after he had passed, again, because it was so sudden. And there were lots of things that he did for us to just show that he was there. One of them being the next one that my grandma, my cousins experienced again right after he passed. And what we experienced when he passed all happened very quickly within, like, I don't know, I would say that the experiences stopped probably after like a month that he passed away. So like we all experienced lots of things and then they stopped. But the one that is like very special to me, even though it didn't happen to me, was my two cousins were spending the night at my grandma's house, and it was just those two. They were probably 18 at the time, 17, between 16 and 18. They both same age, spending the night at my grandma's house, and it was just those three, my two girl cousins and my grandma. And so my grandma was like, "Okay, girls, like I'm gonna go to bed." My grandma goes up those stairs, goes down the hallway into her room off to the right-hand side. And she is laying in bed and she is not sleeping yet. That my grandma and grandpa normally have the routine of going up into their room. They had a tiny little TV, like those tiny little box TVs in their room. And they would normally watch like the news at night before they went to sleep. So my grandma went upstairs. She was laying in bed. She had the door shut. And then all of a sudden she hears walking up the stairs. And she said at this point, it was later. She had been upstairs for a while. She hears walking up the stairs and she hears the walking down the hallway, the door open to the bathroom and the shower. And my grandma is like, "What the heck are they doing? Why are they taking a shower at like 11 o'clock at night? Like, what are they doing?" And she just left it at that. She's like, whatever. And the next morning she goes downstairs and she was like, "Girls, why were you up so late? Like taking a shower? Like what? I don't understand. Like what were you?" And they were like, "We didn't. We went right to bed. We went to bed like right after you." And my grandma was like, "Oh, okay." So that was always my grandpa's routine. He would come upstairs, walk down the hallway, go into the bathroom and take a shower before he went to sleep at night. And my grandma heard him do it like one last time right after he passed away. And for me, like, it was just a very special thing. Again, even though I didn't personally experience it, just knowing that we were able to have like those little connections with him. And he kind of in his own way said goodbye to us was always something that I will like hold on to and cherish, because they were very special to me, because he was taken away very suddenly and unexpectedly. So yeah, that is just a few of the experiences that I've had, the experiences that my family's had. And again, there's so many more, but those are the ones that really stand out to me, and the ones that I personally experienced are the ones that really stuck with me as a kid. So yeah, that's it.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.